Thank you, Henry. Thank you, Josh, and welcome everybody to the New School for Social Research. I just wonder if we can get a little sense of what departments people are here to look into. How many people are here from psychology, historical studies, liberal studies, creative publishing, sociology, economics, politics? Who am I forgetting? Anthropology. Great. What? Philosophy. Thank you. Philosophy. Good. We actually have a good distribution. Look, I want to be very brief because first of all, the first session went long and I heard it was very informative. Secondly, the real focus of today is to get to talk to faculty members and graduate student liaisons in your departments that you're interested in. I mean, that's, when you go to graduate school, it's less the broad overview and more the kind of drilling down into the discipline and what it prepares you to do, the questions it allows you to think about, and the careers that it prepares you for that really matter. You know, I'm struggling, I must say, here because of the events in Paris, and I'm a Francophile from long ago and a French major in college, and have many, many friends in Paris who have been affected by this, and so I've been really emailing for the last 2 days with friends from Paris and not thinking too much about how to introduce the New School for Social Research to a group of prospective students, I must say. And you know, so one question without being kind of heavy-handed is kind of how does graduate study in social sciences help us deal with, analyze, understand, respond to the kind of social forces that we see in play in this event. And you know, there's obviously no easy answer or single answer to that question, but I think it's these types of kind of pressure points, historic moments that both motivate social research and social analysis and that inspire people to study it. And you know, I'm an economist, so I tend to lean on economists for my inspiration in these things, and I think of Adam Smith and Karl Marx as two that have inspired me a lot. And those are, you know, those are people who thought a lot about why do we theorize at all? Why do we try to think about abstractly the structure and dynamics of social processes? And Smith, in his essays in astronomy back in the 18th century, wrote that we philosophize in order to allay, one of my favorite Smith quotes, to allay the tumult of the imagination, by which I think he philosophized meant to do science. And allay the tumult of the imagination, and there's a lot of tumult right now in the imagination. And I think what he's getting at is we want to make sense out of what appears to be enormous chaos. And he's, of course, writing in a moment of great industrial and concomitant social transformation. But that kind of way of thinking about the role of theory is, to me, very helpful to make sense out of phenomena, whether they're interpersonal psychological phenomena or mass executions that occur in the middle of a major cosmopolitan city. Those are, we need to study, analyze traditions of thinking about social and psychological processes to make sense of these. And of course, I think of Marx for his famous insight or inspiration about why we philosophize, which is not just to understand, but also to change society. And so the Marxian notion that we learn in order to change the social processes that we're even dealing with to understand is one that I think is very much also at the core of the New School for Social Research in its ethos, in its questions, research questions that our faculty and our graduate students ask, and in our mission, which is to be engaged with the world and to be not just theory for the sake of theory, but to be theory to be engaged in order to inform social change. And our students who do doctorates at the New School for Social Research and who aim for academic careers, tend to not to possibly worry less about careers in which they engage with changing the world directly. But of course, teaching is a way of also changing the world. Teaching, learning is a way of changing the world. And many of our students do not go directly into academic careers. They go into careers of engagement with NGOs, in the private sector, in the government sector. And they are directly and immediately using their skills to change the world. So the New School for Social Research was founded in 1919. I'm sorry, the New School was founded in 1919. And you'll see the redundancy in our naming right now, because we in the Graduate School of Social Science have the words the New School in it, but we are part of a university, which you heard about all morning, which is called the New School. The New School was founded in 1919, really as a reaction against traditional academics. And it was a renegade group from Columbia University that came downtown, which didn't want the hierarchy of university, which didn't want the traditional teacher-student hierarchical relationship, and et cetera, governance relationship. And the ethos there was to educate the already educated. And it was a very interesting group, and it held immediately very popular classes, eventually a few years later over in the 12th Street building. And in many ways, we inherit that legacy in 2015, which is we've got a room full of educated people, and you're all aspiring to further your education and to do it in a very, I would say, to not overuse the phrase, engaged way, in a way that is in touch with the world that we're in today and which gives you skills in a particular discipline, but in a very engaged way. The second historic moment of the New School was the founding of the New School for Social Research, and it was called the University in Exile, and it was formed as a harbor for a group of Jewish, German largely, refugees who held high-level academic positions, mostly in Germany, and who had been thrown out of work by Nazi law, and they were removed from their positions, and they were looking both to save their lives, but also to continue their work. And they were brought here as a group in 1933. There was a group of 10 of them originally, and then it expanded. And what was interesting about the refugee project, there's a lot that's interesting about it, and it resonates a lot with issues today. But one thing that was interesting was that it was rather than an effort which took place on the part of the New School administration along with the Rockefeller Foundation and other foundations to fund these folks, not to just place them, one in Ohio, one in Berkeley, one in Michigan, one in Florida, but to keep them together. And the University in Exile, which quickly became the Graduate Faculty of Political and Social Science, because while they were exiles, they really didn't want to go back to Germany, this group, they continued certain intellectual traditions that were continental European. And in fact, one of the goals of bringing them together here was to retain those traditions. And they were really interesting traditions in which continue, I don't want to overstate it, but continue to this day to inform the intellectual profile that we continue to teach and push forward. And each department, as you break out into department groupings, can explain kind of the narrative which links its work today and its theoretical underpinnings of its curriculum today to that legacy, some more closely than others. But I think this kind of distinctiveness of the New School for Social Research, which I would claim really has validity, is a valid narrative, has important relations to that history of being the University in Exile. It is kind of rooted in that University in Exile. The second thing, and maybe second to last thing I'll say, is that that tradition was around welcoming refugees into the US. And it was not, there was a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment in the 1930s. And so a lot of what we're hearing today, both the kind of racist version of it in the Donald Trump version and the very fearful version that we will of course be hearing in Paris and Europe once we determine that there were refugee Syrians involved in this attack, that anti-immigrant sentiment was at play in the 1930s, and the University in Exile was thus founded not just on the ethos of these continental European intellectual traditions, but also on the ethos of openness, welcoming those who have been persecuted, exploring challenges to democracy of those pushes either for or against that openness. They were about, the ethos was about a world where statelessness, because of course those refugees were without really a state for which they were citizens. What did that mean for them, their lack of rights, etc., but also what did it mean for the notion of the state, of the nation state? And so those moments of 1930, I think, really have a lot of relevance for where we are today as we think about the psychological issues associated with mobility of people across countries, the political challenges of that, both for them and for the nations that welcome them or push them out, for the social dynamics that are involved in the process of a world of globalization and mobility, which, you know, one could say is at unprecedented levels and has unique technological dimensions and is in a new political moment, but really, I think, connect back to the origins of the New School for Social Research. Last thing I want to say, and I will wrap up, I promise, Henry, is that the last word in the title of our name is really one of the important emphases of the whole engagement with graduate school, which is that this is a place that very much values research. And, you know, perhaps for the Smithian reason, perhaps for the Marxian reason, but it's a very intense scholarly environment, which, as somebody who's been a faculty member here for 22 years, has found unbelievably inspiring and creative. And that's what this division, as it were, contributes to the university as a whole. That we see research as one of our prime activities and high quality scholarship at the highest level of standards to be what a university, what really underpins the quality and the fabric of a university. So I really hope that in your breakout groups you will get to questions of what kind of research topics are faculty engaged in, how do the students connect to that research, and how does the curriculum help you get to the point where you're able to do that highest quality engaged social research. I just will point to, I'm going to skip my, I'm just going to point to a few slides which have just some really selections, because I can't stress enough, and a lot of our faculty are in the room here, and I could point to each one of them and tell you about the kind of remarkable scholarship that they're engaged in and have engaged with in the past. This is a faculty and a student body that is interested in thinking and publishing in the most sophisticated ways. And so I welcome you to that. I welcome you to join people like Federico Finkelstein in history, whose book on the dirty war in Argentina has had enormous consequences for thinking about the future of Argentina, which is in the throes of a perhaps historic change in its political dynamic. I'm thinking of Janet Reutman's book from Anthropology, Anti-Crisis, and the view that maybe we use that word crisis. I probably used it already in this talk 4 times. Maybe we use that word too much, and maybe we should think about what that word means historically, conceptually, socially. Very provocative little book. Simon Critchley, perhaps one of our best known faculty members because he edits a column in the New York Times on philosophy called The Stone. And Simon is someone who thinks and believes very deeply, and I'm looking at Jim Miller too as I say this because, well, we'll get to Jim, because I think his work has shown the same thing, that studying classic philosophy, Greek philosophy, has enormous consequences for thinking about issues of ethics and social problems even today. Nancy Fraser, also in politics with a joint appointment in philosophy, whose work on political theory, kind of the dynamics of capitalism, and of course feminism within capitalism have been very significant. Teresa Ghilarducci in our economics department, who's now running a policy institute at the new school focused on retirement equity. And of course, as some of us get older in this room, I know you all stay the same age, but we get older, we think a lot about these things. And she's having major impact in Congress, actually, with some proposals regarding the expansion of Social Security. Emanuele, who's standing right over there, he's even in the room, so he can talk about this when you break out into the psychology, in the psychology group, who's had just a recent spate of work, including this piece published in Science Magazine of enormous importance about theory of mind, about kind of empathy and the types of cultural influences that create empathy in individuals. His is about reading and viewing, the types of things we read and view and how they influence our ability to interact. And the last slide is Jim Miller, who's in the back of the room and who's running this, both the politics department professor, but also now running this new program that many of you are here for on creative publishing and critical journalism. And the guy in the middle is not on our faculty. Does anyone know who that is? Boy, unbelievable. I thought the boss. He's the boss. And he is... What's that? What's that? Springsteen, thank you. So this was a picture that ran, I forget in which magazine, where somebody caught Springsteen not just reading Jim's book, Examined Lives, from Socrates to Nietzsche, but he's marking it up with a pencil. So talk about... Yes, we'd like to know what he wrote in those margins, exactly. Anyway, I'm going to stop with that. Thank you very much for being here. You can, of course, write to me, email me, or ask me questions today directly, and I'm happy to answer any of those and respond to you. But I think the most important thing is to dig in with your faculty that are in the departments that you're interested in, and the student advisors, particularly in those departments, because they really know what's going on and what the student experience is like. Good luck, and we hope to see you in the fall.